This episode is brought to you by Green Skies Analytics, an audit analytics service provider that works with internal audit departments that have data analysts and are still frustrated with trying to make analytics actually work, aren't getting the expected ROI, who can't break through the communication barrier between the analyst and the audit team, and those that need experienced direction for an audit analytics strategy and process. Those that feel like they've wasted time and money on trainings, aren't getting the value they want, not prioritizing the highest risk areas for the organizations, or have projects that seemingly never get completed. Do you deal with any of that? If you do, go to the show notes of this episode and click the Green Skies Analytics link, or go to greenskiesanalytics.com to schedule a call and understand how Green Skies Analytics makes analytics actually work for internal audit.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Audit Podcast. I'm your host, Trent Russell, and today on the show, we have Casey Atwater. Casey is the former head of audit at ZoomInfo and is the current founder at ControlBridge AI. He's created the system of record for intelligent SOX controls. I'll leave it to Casey as we get into the show to talk more about that and exactly what he's doing. But some of the things that Casey and I also hit on is he lays out his thesis for the future of SOX and how that the current model is becoming an architect problem, not just a testing problem. Talk about why controls need to live in workflows, how AI may change what management controls and who builds those controls, how audit teams can push more SOX ownership back to management, which I think is the dream for most people and the problem that Casey is helping solve. With that said, here we go. All right, Casey, I know that you recently, I saw this, I think like 2 days ago, have left ZoomInfo. So that's where you were working. And now you've started, I know it's not like you just started on it. I can tell based on our conversation and the website, if nothing else. You started ControlBridge AI. There's a link in the show notes for those that are interested. You can go check it out. But briefly tell the audience what that's about and really why you started it. Like, what's the genesis of, I feel like I need to do this right now?
Yeah. So I started ControlBridge AI is really to help enable management to run SOX, because I think internal auditors are spending a lot of their time, 60% of their time, on SOX activities. And so if you can build a system to really like build the architecture of SOX and what it looks like, you really start with how to enable management. And so that's really the why I started ControlBridge AI. I think we're in this area of technology advancement and really utilizing that technology to not only one increase the speed of the velocity to basically perform to audit controls, but really redesign the architecture of SOX. And so really that starts with management and enabling management. And so the tool is really to help build intelligent SOX controls. And that starts with understanding how the company operates and the processes and how the data moves within the organization. And so building a system to allow for management to be enabled into performing the controls and building a full audit stream from beginning to end. So that internal audit can really focus on the critical areas of what changes within the SOX landscape, and also and spend a significant less time in SOX and more time on other risks within the organization.
Casey, what's your thesis on the future of SOX?
Yeah, the future of SOX. So I think a lot of time the future of SOX is there's four pillars. There's a SOX right now is I would consider a architecture problem within organizations. It hasn't necessarily been set up to be blended within the workflows of an organization. And so I think the foundation of SOX is broken. Um, Enterprise systems were built over the last decade, and there are continuously going to be new systems evolving with AI. Management now has the ability to build systems internally, and the current status quo of SOX is not going to work anymore. And so what I say is it is an architecture problem because everybody has a hand in building systems now. And so you really, from a SOX perspective, what traditionally has happened is you're going to go through and test things on a quarterly basis and to satisfy the management, and they can sign off on 302 or 906 certifications. But now you're going to have to do more than a quarterly basis. You're going to have to do continuous monitoring activities. But it's really going to internal audit is going to have to work very closely with management because the businesses are moving extremely fast now, and systems are getting rebuilt and redesigned. And so what I mean by architectural problem is you can't just go through the status quo of testing things on a quarterly basis. Your environments are continuously changing. So you're going to have to continuously monitor your environment going forward. So that's number one, is it's an architecture problem. Number two, controls have to live inside workflows, not on top of them. So I think a lot of instances, things have been built on top of systems, where you would bring in information and you would take information from systems and put it in Excel and summarize it, and that would be your controls in a lot of instances. You have to basically take a system approach to it, build inside of workflows. So you're going to have a system that can collect information from your ERP, from your CRM, and put it into your AI system and via MCP
Okay.
connections. And so I think you're going to have and live inside workflows. So your workflow and your approvals, if it's not within the actual system of record, you're not going to want to have it in Excel. You're going to want to have it in a system. So you can create that full audit trail from when it was inputted into the actual ERP versus when it came over into your AI system. You can have a full audit trail from beginning to end. That's going to be important to provide that data trail, but it's also going to be important when internal audit wants to go through and see the full audit trail and external audit.
Right.
You're going to be able to easily tap into that and see when the transaction entered the system, when there was an approval. If it wasn't in the system, it was in an AI system itself. But kind of getting rid of this whole thing of like providing things in Excel. Like there shouldn't be things done in Excel. You should be able to package them up and provide electronic approvals going forward. And then pillar three is management owns the architecture. So auditor's role is going to get sharper, not smaller. And what I mean by this is so management's going to own the architecture of SOX. They're going to build the workflows. They're going to essentially um, have it be able to approve the audit trail from beginning to end. The auditors and a lot of things are going to be automated controls. I think there was a study by KPMG in 2025 where it was based on 2024 information. So, it's a couple of years, but I think it's still the same. The systems increased from 17 on average to 40 systems. Yet
Mm.
automation decreased by like 2% from like, I think it was 18 to 16%. Don't quote me
So
exactly on
when we
that.
say 17 to 40, what are we talking like in scope apps? Is that
In
what we're
scope
talking about?
systems, 17 in scope systems in 2022 compared to 40 in scope systems on average in
Is this
2024.
okay? Got it. Got it. Okay.
Um, yeah, automation decreased by 2% from a control perspective. Now tell me, how does that make I don't know how that makes sense, but that's a big problem there. And so like that's where the focus needs to be is like how can you if we're going to bring additional systems in scope, and when you bring additional systems in scope, it increases budget dramatically from an external audit perspective because you have to have those specialized resources to test the systems. But you're not getting any automation gain for it. That doesn't make any
Mm-hmm.
sense. So you've got it's an architecture problem. And I think what happened is management needs to really own this up front so they can build the most optimized system going forward. So you're not bringing a bunch of systems in scope that don't really provide you any automation gain. Um, so, but that's really management's role, not necessarily internal audit's role, because you need to be independent and objective and provide that assurance. But what that will do is if you can, number one, cut down on the number of in scope systems from the SOX perspective, it's going to ultimately reduce the audit hours. Um, and then audits role internal audit won't have to be testing necessarily all these specific systems from the SOX perspective. They can focus on other risks within the organization. I mean, there was another study out there that I've seen where essentially the total risk of like failures of companies, like only 1 to 2% have ever failed it in the I don't know the exact number. I've been by like 30 years or something like that. Only 1 to
Uh,
2% companies failed as it relates to like internal controls or financial reporting risk. There's a lot of other areas where companies fail. Yet internal audit is spending about 60% of their time on ICFR risk. So how can you really fix that problem? It's not going to be internal audit going in here and saying, okay, we need to redesign this entire control framework. It's got to be, we can advise management. So management's really needs to go and figure out how to like redesign these controls so it makes it easier and you spend less time going forward. And
yeah.
audit's role should be if you have more automation in the systems and lower in scope systems, your budgets will go down. But audit can get flagged when there are changes to these automations. So they don't need to be looking at these automations every single year if there wasn't any changes to it. And so that's why it's important to get a full audit trail. And that's with AI systems now, I think you have the ability to get a full audit trail from beginning to end. So then internal audit really knows when they need to go and step in and review an automated control because, hey, it showed up on the change log that we changed this configuration.
Anyway, the reason I kind of laughed earlier when you were giving that stat was I remember I don't know, I think I was like a manager or something in external audit. And I was talking to a client of ours. She was the IT audit manager. And it's like this SOX thing. Guidance had changed. And so it was like we needed a lot more support than we did in the previous year. And she was external audit formerly also. So she was like the one that would always push back and be like, well, when I was there, we didn't do it that way. And I was like, well, you've been gone 3 years. Things have changed. Um, But anyway, she was like, I know. She's like, we don't really care that much about socks. Like we've been good every year. Like nothing really pops out. It's not a priority for us. There's another huge regulation that had hit their industry recently or the year prior, and they were prepping for it. And she's like, it's not the center of our world. And I just went, yeah, I guess that's a good point. I never really thought, that's all I ever knew. Like I just grew up, I started in external audit. It was just SOX all the time, an advisor engagement here or there, but that was practically it. And so to me, it was just like SOX is the center of the world to me. And so all that to say that uh, it is important to understand there are other things for those who are like we do SOX 90% of the time or 100% of the time. There are other things out there. So anyway, all right, I interrupt you enough. Go ahead, Casey. Finish your thought. I think you were wrapping up 3 going into 4.
So in four is so AI is going to change both what management has to control and who can build the systems to do it, like I said. And I think management is going to be building the systems. They're going to be wanting to utilize AI in the performance of controls. Um, and it's really internal. It's going to have to be there from an advisory perspective. But what I'm saying, the changes are going to be dynamic, right? And so what teams has historically spent 60% plus on SOX in this dynamic world of, management being able to change controls, the design of controls, building AI systems. I expect that time to increase, right? And so really based on that increase, but there's a bunch of other changes in regulations. And so really the architecture and who actually owns the responsibility of SOX is going to have to shift to management if companies want their internal audit team to look at other things other than ICFR risk. So I think over these next like 3 to 4 years, everybody wants to cut down on SOX cost. Right now, the industry is cutting down on it based on, okay, well, we'll just do the testing. We'll automate the testing, right? That's not really going to change the entire workflow as a whole. So management's going to be building all these automations because they're getting brought from the tone at the top. We need to utilize AI as much as possible. At least that's what my experience has been. And management wants to utilize AI. So what happens is you're stuck in this area right now where management's building all these things from an operational perspective but can prove out financial reporting risk. So you've got like this AI set of controls, which isn't really being brought into the environment right now because you can't really necessarily rely on that information. So then you got these other the standard controls that are not really AI enabled, right? So you got two separate processes going there right now, and like realistically, you really shouldn't. You should have one streamlined process. So what it's really going to take is there's the concept of the 3 lines of defense, right? I think the first and second line are going to start. I mean, they've already blurred, but like I think it's going to be truly like one line, all right, and then
Mm.
you'll have the third line. But I think the first and second line, you truly need to have that lens of, uh, yeah, we have control owners, and then you have management control owners, I guess you could say, where they're trying to optimize the processes, and really working hand in hand. I know when I was at ZoomInfo, for instance, we built out an internal audit function where we had a controls team, which is really a controls team of one, and then we had internal audit. And we built out a lot of low code data analytic procedures because we were having issues on reconciliations that were manual in nature, and we wanted to figure out how to automate them. So we utilized low code analytical solutions to basically take the manual reconciliation and automate it with a via analytics procedure. And the controls arm of the internal audit function is really working hand in hand with management and advising management and then transferring that analytic over to management so they can own and operate it going forward. Um, and we were able to done a lot of errors, and we were also able to cut out the time that it took to actually perform a control. And so that I thought that was really important for the organization as a whole. And we were also able to reduce system scope too, because we could build a full data analytic procedures. So I think this concept is going to continue to grow. Um, but it really, you really need to work hand in hand with management to figure out how to optimize the process. And with AI now, it's so much easier to build stuff. And so, but what I'm saying is like you really have to break out internal audit to really like focus on that, so that the rest of the internal audit team can be independent and objective.
I think for those listening, there's probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 different points that you made where I'm sure somebody listening is like, I hope he follows up on that one and that one and that one and that one. We don't have time for all those. I mean, just a bullet point of notes from um, your 4 bullet points there. But so
Yep.
all that to say, if they're, I'm sure I'm not going to hit every follow up that people are curious about. So with that said, Casey, I got to imagine it's okay. People hit you up on LinkedIn,
Yep.
and if they have questions or anything, okay, all right. Just want to make sure before I uh, maybe you have your inbox blown up a little bit on LinkedIn. The two that I had, you're talking about continuous auditing, and I forget exactly how you said it. My notes just say CA is a must. Is that something you feel like regulators are going to push and go like our expectation is that you have CA over these controls, or like where's that push going to come from? Because I know in my world, one of the things we always tell people when we start working with them on continuous monitoring or auditing projects is like,
Me.
do you have the buy-in from management? Because they're not going to be super happy about it. They're not going to be responsive if you just go like, hey, we built this thing to find all these flags for everything that you do. Here's
Mm,
50 potential exceptions. We need you to go over them every month and tell us what's up. Like that doesn't tend to go over very well. But for those where
yeah.
you have the business objective and you lay it out in front of management, and they go, oh, that's sweet. Yeah, we could use that. Please, build that. We'd be happy. Whatever. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm coming from. Where do you feel like that push is going to come from?
So there's a couple of dynamics here. Is I know there's changes in the potentially the quarterly reporting requirements to move to semi-annual reporting, and I think that brings more exposure to risk because you can have things that are you know uh, deficiencies that will be out there for 6+ months. All right, so I think you really need to take a risk-based approach on where you want to provide continuous monitoring. Um, is it going to come from the regulators? I don't necessarily know if it's going to come from the regulators. I think the business as a whole is going to know that we don't have these quarterly reporting requirements anymore, and we need to have some way of monitoring activities. I think it's much easier to do continuous monitoring activities now than it has historically been in the past. So, like what normally used to be an expensive budget to basically build these routines out, that budget's going to go down. So I think you need to take a risk-based approach on where, when you look at your SOX environment, where it makes sense to have continuous monitoring, right? And I would say in the IT general controls area is where it makes sense to have continuous monitoring. And why I say that is because if you have an ITGC failure, you basically have an impact on your business process controls as a whole. And it's just easier to do continuous monitoring on like user access and so on and so forth. It's not that difficult. Sure, you could have exceptions, but if you have exceptions, then the review and evaluation exceptions becomes the manual hybrid control. Um, and there would not be a deficiency at that point in time because you were able to evaluate all these exceptions. So I think it's just going to become easier to be able to have continuous monitoring activities. And I don't necessarily know if it's going to be, I don't think it's going to be driven by the regulators, but I think management as a whole, the CFO and CEO that have to sign off on the certifications, are going to want to ensure that they have visibility into their control environment, especially if they're only going to be issuing their financial statements every 6 months. Um, and so I think that dynamic of it's just going to be easier to do these things going forward because you're going to have systems that can be able to do it. Plus, with not being able to report on a quarterly basis, they're going to be wanting to have something there in the middle to kind of fill that gap potentially.
Makes sense. I think the other thing that I was most curious about is any practical, tactical. You keep talking about like management is always supposed to own this. They never really have, but they need to start doing that. What guidance can you give the folks that are listening right now to help like push that back on to management?
Yeah, so I think it's really partnering with management, right? Of like when you have control failures, really kind of going to talk, reach to the other side of the table and advise management on how to like make this more automated and easier. So, really, you give them ideas, and this is where the controls team that I had is where we gave them ideas to figure out how to automate things, right? And we enabled them and we gave them access to these analytical procedure tools. And I think with not necessarily saying, hey, management, you need to go fix this. It's really kind of advising them and giving them the capabilities to be able to fix it. And so I think that is really where, reaching on the other side of the table. kind of partnering together, I think is really what's going to help enable that.
I know we were talking earlier, and with AI and internal audit, it's about efficiencies or some effectiveness also that people are kind of pushing for. But for the most part, it is kind of like, hey, let's automate this stuff to the extent that we can and get efficiency gains there. But you said there's a bigger shift somewhere else. What is that?
So yes, from an internal audit perspective, is efficiency like let's do the testing. Well, we can basically utilize agents to build the testing, and then review by an auditor. Um, but what I'd say, I think we're spending time in the wrong areas right now. If we really want to fix the entire SOX workflow, like the easy thing is to do the testing. I will say that for sure, right? We can definitely decrease the hours. Um, but we just want to have a better control environment as a whole. And I think internal audit's focused on like automating our processes. I think the shift is being able to keep up with the change of processes because management is going to be building all these automations. And kind of referring back to my earlier conversation of like having these two separate processes right now. And so, really, what internal audit's role should be, management's want to cut down on the time on it that it takes to perform controls. So, we need to make sure that we've got a full audit trail on when an individual, a control owner, basically uh, the control architecture and the landscape is going to change. So what we're testing currently today is not going to be how we're testing things 3 years from now. And so I think the focus really needs to be on like how is management, how are we going to retweak our testing in an AI world where management is basically having agents perform controls with a human in a loop. How can we like retool our testing capabilities? I think what's being currently built today is for how controls have operated for the previous 10 years. But that's not how the controls are going to operate 3 or 4 years from now, or maybe even 2 years from now.
I haven't heard a ton of conversation around that, but I think that's a really good point to be made. Like the AI testing tools right now can do really well, and I'm sure they will in the future. They'll adapt just like everybody else, but like it's going to be different in 3 years easily. I think that's a pretty conservative guess. It's going to be pretty different in 3 years. Okay. Um, what about so for those that are listening, and so it's a Tuesday right now. Let's say that they're listening, and what could they practically, tactically do Wednesday as a SOX leader or audit leader or something like that, uh, based on some of the conversation that we've been having?
Yeah, I would say a couple things you can do. Number one is like look at your control environment and figure out where you tend to have failures historically over the last 2 years. Reach out to those control owners and figure out a better way to essentially prove out the prove the controls. Uh, Help collaborate with control owners to build an automated control over these processes where you historically had errors. So that's number one thing I would say. Number two thing is figure out where you have redundancy in controls to address risk. Optimize your controls with management. Talk to them to figure out where you can optimize controls and not necessarily have so many controls. Number three, and this is all you've got to go through and do your research, look at your risk and control matrix from the SOX perspective, and then go reach out across the aisle and go talk to your control owners. Number three is look at your systems that you have in scope and see how much gain you're getting from those systems being in scope. How many automations are you relying upon? Because I think that's a big thing. It's you want to when you bring a system in scope, it increases cost dramatically. So the one area that you can really cut cost out is optimizing the number of systems that you have in scope. And if you're not getting any automation gain from that system, then you got to really ask yourself, why do we have the system in scope? Um, and so those are ways to number one, add value to the business. And number two, optimize your ICFR program.
Okay, see, I know, like in our world, I've seen a ton of conversation around SOX, like in the AI world that we're living in, and so I think you've helped answer a lot of those questions for folks. I think even just the like the practical tactical that we talked about is going to be extremely helpful. Kind of how we closed that last question out, and then how management can take on more ownership as they should. I think it's going to be really helpful for people also. So really appreciate that. Like I know there's going to be people listening that this is going to have a positive impact on their professional life. With that said, is there anything else that you want to leave the audience with? We'll hand the mic over to you. You can close this out.
Yeah, I think as an auditor, it's really important to be technical savvy and understand what AI can do for you. But I think what's even more important is the communication aspect and building the relationships within the organizations and your peers. I think that is really where it's going to take an auditor to the next level of essentially understanding the issues within an organization. Is it really starts with building relationships amongst your peers, but also with your control owners. And so I think really foster that of, maybe set up monthly cadences with your control owners. I think starting to build that relationship, not necessarily always auditing them, but just like understanding them as an individual. Because I think that is where it's really going to set you apart in this AI world where there's a lot of technology, and the technology can really you can move so much faster. But I think the human element is going to be crucial to the success. So I leave you with that, is that really build relationships, because I think they're going to last for a long time and it will set you apart.
Hey everyone, thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Audit Podcast. Whatever platform you're listening on right now, I'm sure there's a subscribe button somewhere, so please hit the subscribe button there. If you're listening through iTunes or Spotify, feel free to go give us that 5-star rating. It only took me about 16 seconds to give myself a 5-star review, and it really helps to get future guests to come on the show, so we'd really appreciate that. Lastly, be sure to check out the show notes and follow us on all our social media channels on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and on TikTok. Also, if interested, please sign up for our weekly newsletter from the Audit Podcast. Thank you all. Have a great one.